So, federal prosecutors say that a sprawling transnational drug trafficking organization that moved high purity ice from California that was imported in industrial quantities of JBL from South Korea. They laundered profits through fake beauty companies and supplied, what investigators describe as one of the East Coast's largest underground quote-unquote sex chem networks. So, tonight on Fed by Fire, we break down the rise and fall of an alleged operation that stretched all the way from Seoul, South Korea to Washington, D.C. So what's up, everybody? Hope everybody's doing good out there. Welcome back to Fed by Fire. I'm Christian Whitlow, your host, and tonight we are diving into a case that honestly sounds like, a plot out of a science fiction movie or, some crime movie mixed with cartel logistics, the nightclub scene, all that. But federal authorities say this organization operated from at least January 2023 through April 2026 and allegedly were trafficking massive amounts of ice and JBL throughout New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC, and beyond. And this wasn't just, that regular street level chaos. According to investigators, this operation allegedly had suppliers, redistributors, money launderers, stash apartments, shell corporations, parcel shipments, encrypted communications, coded ledgers, peer-to-peer payment systems, the whole nine, and even international chemical suppliers that were all functioning together like, a machine. And the indictment names 11 defendants federally charged with, another charge separately, and prosecutors say the organization sourced ice from California while importing JBL from South Korea, disguised as beauty products, and they also disguised it as industrial cleaners. Now, if you don't know what JBL is, it's a it's an industrial solvent legally used in things like paint removers, adhesives, and chemical manufacturing. But once it enters the human body, it rapidly converts into GHB, one of the most notorious club drugs we've all heard about. And investigators say the organization wasn't just distributing JBL by itself. Authorities claim it was commonly paired with, ice in a combination known as sex chem or chemsex. And I've never heard of this. I'm new to this. It's a dangerous underground party culture apparently involving marathon stimulant use, disassociation, and extreme sexual risk-taking. Sounds like my kind of party, but federal prosecutors describe the combination as a highly unpredictable, potentially lethal. One drug overstimulates your nervous system while the other suddenly suppresses your breathing, and boom, you're done. Your consciousness gone. And authorities say, they say about all these drugs, you don't know what's really in them. And you could have a seizure, coma, respiratory issues, and according to investigators, this wasn't isolated recreational use anymore. This allegedly had became organized business, a straight up business model. And the case reportedly started after a fatal poisoning in the DC metropolitan area. From there, DEA agents and Homeland Security investigations, the IRS, Criminal Investigations Unit, Customs and Border Protection, and local police departments all came together on this one, and even the South Korean authorities began tracing the supply chains, the payment systems, and the shipments that were connected to the operation. And what they allegedly uncovered was a modern narcotics network operating more like an international startup than a transnational, basically street gang. They just don't have a name. And federal authorities say the conspiracy used encrypted messaging apps, coded languages, burner phones, commercial mail services, and fake businesses to move product. Like we see all the time on this channel, they also used it to conceal profits. According to the court filings, members allegedly accepted payments through peer-to-peer financial apps before funneling money through, shell businesses, accounts to make proceeds appear legitimate. And investigators say that fake beauty and cosmetic companies were created in New York and Washington, D.C., and, specifically to facilitate JBL imports from South Korea, and shipments were allegedly mislabeled on purpose as cleaning solutions as well as cosmetic supplies. But while entering the United States through commercial import channels, they had it set up. And at the organization's peak, prosecutors say approximately 600 liters of JBL were being imported every month. That's a whole lot of date rate. So think about that scale for a second. 600 liters monthly. That's a lot. That's not a party favor operation anymore. That is industrial trafficking. And, with these chemicals, people got to be safe. They're dangerous. And authorities say that the supply train had, stretched a little bit of everywhere. And according to the prosecutors, a South Korean exporter named Sohyun An allegedly shipped enormous quantities of JBL to the destinations, also in Europe, Australia, and the United States. I probably butchered that name, you guys, but federal investigators reportedly traveled overseas and worked directly alongside the South Korean law enforcement to identify these exporters that were tied to this organization. And that international cooperation led to the arrest of 5 South Korean nationals and the seizure of approximately 1.5 metric tons of JBL in September 2025, which prosecutors describe as the largest domestic controlled substance seizure in South Korean history. So it's one for the books, you guys. 1.5 metric tons of, GHB, basically. That's an amount people, usually associate with other drugs like blow, fatty, what do they used to call it? Swirl. But meanwhile, on the American side, prosecutors say that the ice shipments are the big problem too. That they were being transported from California using commercial parcel carriers, like UPS and the United States Postal Service, to get it in. And investigators allege that the packages were coordinated through encrypted apps and distributed across the Northeast Corridor into Philadelphia, Baltimore, and New York, as well as Washington, D.C. And according, to federal authorities, nearly every major seizure in this case involved ice that purity levels were above 90%. So they had the good stuff, and some allegedly tested at 97 to 98% purity. So they had it going on. I bet they don't think so now, but that's important because modern ice is not the same drug people picture from the early 2000s. It's not what the old heads remember. Today's cartel-linked ice is often produced at extremely high purity levels using industrial-scale chemical synthesis. They perfected it, and the psychological effects are devastating: severe paranoia, hallucinations, psychosis, all of that. Not fun. The addiction, it creates a cycle: sleep deprivation lasting days, organ damage. None of that's fun. So, I bet if you could ask these guys, none of them would say that they were worth it. And, JBL, GHB, it's not a popular thing. So the indictment lays out, what prosecutors describe as a clear hierarchy inside this organization. And authorities allege that there were upstream suppliers obtaining narcotics in bulk quantities, regional coordinators that were redistributing shipments downstream, and distributors selling directly to the users, and financial operators concealing proceeds. So this indictment is far from over. Investigators say that members maintain coded ledgers, they track the transactions digitally, and use stash houses across locations in multiple states. And one defendant, focused heavily on was Matthew Thomas Kent, 40 years old, operating in Washington, D.C. So according to the court document, Kent allegedly served as a primary distributor responsible for moving the multi-pound quantities of ice and kilogram amounts of GHB through stash houses in Northeast D.C. And authorities first arrested him in March 2024 in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, where investigators reportedly, recovered roughly 480 G's of ice from his vehicle. He was caught red-handed. Then in June 2024, federal agents searched his D.C. residence, and blam, they allegedly found another 210 G's of ice. He was back at it. And a Glock 9mm as well, so he's looking at it. But investigators say the operation definitely didn't stop after his arrest. According to the prosecutors, Kent allegedly continued trafficking throughout 2025. In April of that year, authorities say that he directed a controlled sale involving approximately 221 grams of ice, testing at 98% purity. So he's cooked. Later in July 2025, investigators say Kent traveled by train from Philadelphia to Washington Union Station, carrying roughly 400 G's of ice that tested as well at 97% purity. Federal agents also recovered, what prosecutors describe as a coded drug ledger that was shared between Kent and other co-defendants such as Colton Hustling. Hustling is 30 years old and is described in the indictment as both a distributor and organizer inside of this conspiracy. But he's innocent until proven guilty, according to federal authorities. After the South Korean seizures disrupted the JBL supply chain, Hustling allegedly tried rebuilding the operation by creating another shell company and attempting new imports from new distributors. In February 2026, Customs and Border Protection intercepted a package allegedly destined for his Washington, D.C. apartment containing more than 6 keys of JBL. He wasn't stopping. He didn't see the red flags. And when agents later searched the apartment in April 2026, prosecutors say they recovered narcotics, scales, packaging materials, a money counter, as well as travel records showing international trips to Switzerland and other locations that they're going to try to link to these crimes. Another defendant, Joshua Glenn Taylor, 47 years old, is accused of the redistributing of large amounts of ice throughout the Washington, D.C. area. Investigators say financial records connected Taylor and reflected hundreds of thousands of dollars in suspicious transactions, consistent with, narcotics trafficking. And federal agents arrested him at a hotel in Short Pump, Virginia, where authorities reportedly recovered another half pound of ice along with Fetty from his room. And honestly, one of the most interesting parts of this entire case to me is how modern it feels. This wasn't some old school corner crew operating with payphones and trap houses. This was modern stuff. This was allegedly an encrypted, financially layered, internationally connected organization using shell companies, parcel shipping, digital payments, and code and communication, as well as global supply chains. And this is what it's going to look like. It reflects the way organized narcotics trafficking has evolved in the 21st century. Federal authorities say the takedown happened in stages. On April 29, 2026, investigators arrested 8 East Coast defendants while simultaneously executing search warrants across 8 federal districts, including D.C., Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, as well as Florida. Then on May 7th, federal agents arrested the California-based defendants and executed additional search warrants in Los Angeles as well as Southern California. During the raids, though, authorities reportedly recovered approximately 7.5 keys of ice, added on to everything else, 24 keys of JBL, additional narcotics including blow, pills, and over $150,000 in cash. Across, the entire investigation, investigators say they seized more than 35 kilograms of ice and approximately 800 keys of GBL inside the United States alone. And, what makes this especially, a little disturbing is the market, prosecutes these drug dealers, and there's going to be another person taking their place. And, this case just really shows me, that the ice and the JBL seem nothing's dying. They were used simultaneously during these prolonged sessions lasting hours, even days. Medical experts have warned for years that this chemsex culture creates an unusually high overdose risk because users repeatedly redose powerful substances while they're severely sleep deprived and dehydrated. It's not a good combo. JBL is particularly dangerous because the difference between intoxication and overdose can be incredibly small. I've done swirl. Federal authorities also emphasize, the financial side of this operation. This was serious. The IRS criminal investigations agents say that the traffickers allegedly disguised the proceeds through a bunch of fake businesses, accounts, and laundering methods designed to make narcotics profits appear legitimate, as they always do. And, that's become basically a huge trend in modern organized crime. Drug organizations today, they don't just move narcotics, they move money digitally, internationally, and often throughout businesses designed to look clean on paper. And this is nothing new. They've been doing this the whole time. And another reality people overlook is how international, these underground economies have become. A distributor in DC can communicate with a supplier in California who coordinates and imports from South Korea while payments move through apps and shipments, and travel through commercial logistics companies, all within days, no time. And that's the modern narcotics landscape. So, fast, encrypted, globalized, and increasingly synthetic. Now, legally speaking, every defendant in this case is presumed innocent until proven guilty in the court of law. And, these allegations were presented by federal prosecutors in an indictment. But even if half of these allegations are true and half of them stick, and they may have dismantled one of the most sophisticated chemsex trafficking organizations and publicly exposed them on the East Coast in recent years. And that's an achievement. And honestly, what sticks with me the most about this case is how sterile and corporate this entire thing sounds. Fake beauty companies, international shipments, they thought they had it all figured out. Payment processors, financial laundering, supply chains, logistics. It's organized crime dressed like a startup. It's what it really is. And meanwhile, On the street level, the consequences are addiction, overdoses, exploitation, violence, and death. Because underneath all the encrypted apps and shell corporations, it still ends the same way, People dying, people in jail just like these guys, families getting phone calls in the middle of the night, and it doesn't matter what any drug you're doing, users are spiraling into psychosis, communities, flooded with, addicts, and it's sad. So, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think cases like this show how modern trafficking organizations have evolved, far beyond traditional cartel stereotypes? What do y'all think? Or do you think that law enforcement can realistically keep a pace with all this encrypted technology and international chemical supply chains? I think they can. And what do you think the future of, this thing looks like? And one thing that really, got me about this case is the rips. They kept letting them back out so they could get more stuff on them. And I keep seeing that. If they were to stop the first time they were caught, they might be in a better place, And I bet, they don't think it was worth it. And also, I've never heard of the chemsex community. If there's anybody out there from the chemsex community who would like to do a podcast and tell me about it, hit me up. I'm interested. I'll have something else for you guys before the weekend's out. As always, love you guys. Peace.